Well, praise the Lord. It's really good to be here in God's presence today. And I just want to speak about faith today because this word faith is linked up with the word faithfulness. And it's really important to understand that because to a lot of people, faith is seen when someone, when they pray for them being raised from the dead or somebody being healed and somebody receiving some financial blessing or somebody prospered or whatever. There's lots of things we can pray for, and it's almost instantaneous in a lot of cases. And then they put down, they say, oh, that person's got great faith because they see some evangelist do this kind of stuff. Or some just ordinary Christian, they see these kind of miraculous answers to prayer. Then they say they're great men and women of faith. But in my eyes, they're not great women of faith, men and women of faith until they prove themselves to be faithful in every situation in life. Because in this life, our faith will be tested. And so that's one aspect of faith. Believing that God will heal the sick, believing God will raise the dead, believing that God will meet your financial needs and all the rest. Every Christian should operate in this way. But I find there's a lot of people, Christians, that operate in that way, that simple way, but they don't have the quality to or the endurance to go through the trials and the testings that make them people of great faith. That means people that are faithful. You see, there's lots of people have that simple faith to pray prayers to simply receive miracles. But you see, faith is where your feet are. Faith is when your life is put on the line and God asks you to go one way, which may be contrary to your way, and you've got to stick with God in it. And if he tells you to stay in a place for so long, you stay in that place. If he tells you to move on, you move on. It's a bit like the cloud in the Old Testament. When it stayed, they stayed. When it moved, they moved. And so sometimes, Jesus said to Peter one day, he said, when you were young, you went where you want, but when you're older, some will carry you where you do not want to go. And this signified Peter's death. Now, church history tells us that Peter was crucified upside down. And many of Jesus' disciples were martyred for the faith. So basically, they'd taken up their cross and followed him. Now that's faith on the line. That's not that simple faith that a lot of Christians want, where they don't feel no pain. They don't want to know what pain is. They don't want to go that way with Jesus. But if you want to be a true disciple of Jesus Christ, you want to be a person of faith, and you want to hear those words, well done, good and faithful servant, on that day, then we need to be prepared to go through these things in this life. I'm not saying every Christian will suffer the same, but there are some are called down that road. Unless you're prepared to surrender all to God, then you're not really a disciple of Jesus Christ. You're just basically a nominal Christian, and you're operating the permissive will of God. And so when people say, well, I say today, tribulation, it will increase on this earth, God is shaking the nations. When people say, none of this will touch you, well, it's not actually factually right that. Yes, we are protected in God, and our families are protected. But there's an appointed time for every one of us to die. There's an appointed time for everything in this life. And although we are protected by God, that doesn't mean to say we'll be pain-free. Now, I'm sure many of you will witness with what I'm saying today that your life hasn't been pain-free. Some of you have suffered mentally. And you say, but I want to tell you, if you've suffered mentally, that doesn't mean to say God has left you. I've been through that kind of pain in my life. I've been there. And a physical pain. And all the kinds of pains that could be thrown at people in this life. Basically, I've suffered probably most of them. Bereavement and many other things. But the point is, that's where our faith is tested. When we go through all these things and we still come out trusting God. And, we're on top of it. I'm not saying you won't go down. I'm not saying you won't grieve. I'm not saying you won't suffer and cry and have your head in your hands. But if you trust God through it all and say, I don't know what's happening, he will lift you up, and he will lift you up into that light again. And I want to tell you today, that is what abundant life's all about. It's the life that can take you through all the pain and all the trials of this life, and you still come out rejoicing. That's what it's about. So your faith, if you want to follow Jesus, will be tested. That's a fact. To say that if something happened to your country, to say that we will not be affected by anything that, say, happened to your country, a terrorist attack, is ridiculous. Now, sometimes Christians die in catastrophes. That's a fact. And some Christians die in road accidents. I can give you loads of testimonies on that. Now, when I go out and I drive and I go out in my car, I always pray for journey mercy, and God gives me those journey mercies. But if that particular day it was God's appointed time for me to die, then I'd die. And I wouldn't be able to do anything about it. You see, some Christians are taken at an early age. We hear that there's many martyrs, even in this present day, where they die young as children. And young people, it's God's appointed time for them to die. They couldn't have died premature before that. So we've got to trust God. And whatever God's got planned for us, if we are, we could live to a ripe old age, because that's God's will for us. But this is why I say to people, we've got to trust God for the moment. And we're not to fret about the future, because we are entering into great tribulation. This world is getting more intensely in a serious mess, as God is shaking the nations. But let me simply put a few scriptures to you today. 1 Peter 1:7. And I want to tell you, we've got to trust God through it all. Because if you want genuine faith, that is more precious than gold, because that's what God is looking at. On that day when he returns, he wants to see the gold of your faith. Then that gold has to be tested. It has to be refined. All the dross has to be purged out. Now, God values faith that has been tested, purified, and passed the test, because he says it's more precious than gold. James 1:3. Faith must be tested to prove its worth, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. So it produces something. It produces patience, which is the fruit of the Spirit. Patience, or it produces endurance or perseverance. So if you want to be a persevering Christian that can go through it all and come out victorious, we need to be tested on these things. Now, I don't ask God to test me, but he will test me at his appointed times. If you have need of endurance, so that after you have done the will of God, you may receive the promise. So if you want to receive the promise of God and all your inheritance that's promised you, then you need to endure and prove your faith, that you do not become sluggish or lazy, but imitate those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. So you have to have patience when you're following Jesus Christ. Hebrews 6:11-12. And then Job went on to say, and I haven't got much time now, but let me finish with this. Job went on to say, and he was tested. I've been reading Job recently. He was a great man of God. And he said this at the end of it all, because God will always bring those who have followed him and honoured him through to the blessing, because he did with Job. But he knows the way that I take, and when he has tested me, I shall come forth as gold. Job 23:10. Gold which comes through the refining fires of suffering. Now, those people that have had their lives taken at an early age, mid-age, whatever, surely they're in the place of gold now. They're in the presence of Jesus Christ. So we don't have to fear, because whether we're asleep or awake, asleep, that means in heaven with Jesus, or awake, doesn't mean we're asleep in heaven. We are together with Christ. Now, genuine faith will be tested to prove whether we trust God through the trials and keep trusting God through thick and thin. A sweet Christian smile and outward show does not prove genuine faith. Don't be fooled by the sweet, sickly smile of that plastic smile that so many Christians had. But God knows our hearts, and he will see whether you've got that genuine faith or not. Trust Jesus for the moment. Trust him every day. Don't think about pain. Don't think about tribulation. Yes, it's coming. Think about Jesus. Come on, let's praise the Lord right now.